It is recording. Cool. And we got about 2 more minutes, so we'll give it a few more so people are still dinging in, which is great. So again, welcome everybody. And again, as I work through some of this stuff, if any questions come up, if you want to ask a question, there is an ask question feature. So if you just go in the chat area, just post that question. I'll try to follow up with them at the end. I've been using this software for about a year, but I'm still got some ins and outs I'm still trying to figure out sometimes. It's a great software. Hello, Heather. All right, about another minute, we'll get it rolling here. We are recording this, like I said, so they're going to get some of this beginning talk, banter back and forth, but that's okay. We'll get through it, and Kristen's here. Hello, Kristen. I'm not sure which one, because we have as many Kristens as we do Erics now, which is getting confusing. Actually, we still have more Kristens. There's another ding. All right, so we're right there, top of the hour. So welcome, everybody. This is our Functional Trainer Module 2. Again, based on the vision of where this is going, I was trying to deliver some content that I've already had recorded, so you don't have to sit there and make time out of your day to come hear me talk somewhere or put on a talk. So we actually filmed that last piece from the first Module 1 about a month ago, because I know you guys recognize Brian, who was in the video. I think you saw quite a bit of Matt, too, sitting in the front row. That worked out really well, breaking that into that piece, because then you guys on your own time can do the videos and then answer the quizzes, and also for the same thing for this too, for the webinars. I would like you to be on the webinar just because you can ask some questions as we start to work through some of this stuff if it comes up. But I'm also going to be recording it too, so I can send it out to you. So we do have one more webinar coming up in a few weeks. So again, I would love participation, but again, it's not a requirement on your part. I do appreciate your time and your energy for this whole part. And the email next week will have the second part of the filming from our last month's Train the Trainer program at our office in Newtown. And it's going to be with Noah, our head coach down there, who's going to work through regressions and progressions and kind of tie some of the pieces together when it comes to designing out the strength side of a lot of the programming. So, all right, cool. So I'm going to kind of jump into it, and I will warn you ahead of time, you are going to have to sit through some of the most atrocious picture drawing you've ever seen in your life. I'm not the best artist in the world, but I want to kind of start out to what's something near and dear to me. And again, when you're working with your clients, always understand that there's been a developmental aspect to every one of your clients as they start to go through life and as they develop out the systems to start creating movement, which if you haven't caught on by now, movement's a very, very dear thing for me when being a chiropractor and then being a trainer for so long too, is looking at a human move. I've realized that the body can take a lot of stress, it can take a lot of breakdown before it feels any sort of pain. And what I realized as a trainer is that the number one thing that happened if someone got hurt, they wouldn't be training anymore. So a lot of the adaptive model that I start to work with is that I go in not assuming anything when it comes to a client. I don't assume that that their low back is just going to go away. I don't assume that their low back is fine just because it doesn't hurt anymore. I try to dig deeper, and that's where the FMS really is a key for us right now to kind of start to unlock that question, is there something there? So I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the theory and then some of the concepts behind how to work with the FMS. So, but first and foremost, I'm going to start with a horrific diagram here, but bear with me. My computer's a little bit glitchy, but I'm going to draw the human face here. Oh, it's even more glitchy than I thought, but bear with me. This doesn't represent anybody's client. There you go. Good. So obviously that's a person. Hopefully you can see that, and they're looking this direction right here. So the reason I'm starting out with this is because I want to start out with just one is a developmental process of how the spine and how eventually movement starts to occur. I've been posting. Actually, I'm going to tell you that real quick. I've been posting some videos over here. This is our private Cornerstone Club's trainer Facebook page. And I've been posting some things on here, and Heather's been up on there posting some stuff. This is really going to be a nice little outlet for me to kind of deliver some of the pieces that I start to talk. I'm going to put some of the influences in my career, my life, up on this webpage so you guys can start to dip into it a little bit. because I will talk about Gray Cook a little bit today, because some of this right in the beginning here is based from his primitive pattern speaks, which I'll try and post some of that. There's Dr. Dane performing the FMS, and then Kelly Starrett, you'll see towards the end. I've adopted a lot of my principles based off of Kelly's recommendations and watching his mobilitywod.com website. So again, try to get back to this webpage. You have about 24 members so far total. I think most of you that are on this are a part of that. In order to be a part of that, you just have to friend me on Facebook under this account, which is my professional account, and then I'll actually give you access up onto that page. And then again, I want, if any of the trainers want to contribute onto here, you have a video, you have some sort of, you know, something you want us to watch or laugh about, or maybe it's a, you know, it's a kudos and say, you know, my patients are down, you know, 10 pounds. I know that Kim and Ellen over in Doylestown are working with our first batch of 8WW clients, and I think they're down over 10 pounds. I know one was down 9, one was down 10. That was a week or two ago. So that's definitely something you want to share on this page right here, just so we can start to see some of the, you know, incredible things that we do as trainers. So let's go back to my drawing over here. So there's my person. So what I want to start out with was just kind of the formation of how we start to develop out this whole structure, and then ultimately how it starts to fall apart on us, because in design, we really are perfect. You know, through evolution or creationism, whichever one you want to look at, our design is amazing to get to the point where we're at. And at the same time, we're not amazing. So we do a lot of things to our body, and we get away from it. One of the actual stories that was shared with me through Kelly Starrett, and listen to some of his talks, he basically said one day he was on the elevator with one of his friends out in Vegas, and this rather rotund woman who was probably a good 100 pounds overweight jumped on board, and she was drinking one of those large, you know, yard beers or, you know, Slurpees with tequila in it, and smoking a cigarette. And she sat there and actually flirted with Kelly and his buddy like nothing was going wrong. And she proceeded to, you know, ride the elevator with them flirting, and then got off the elevator. And Kelly looked at his friend and said, "Wow, it's really hard to kill a human being." And, you know, he's right. We can do a lot to ourselves and get away with it. And that's one of the things that sometimes we deal with, you guys, you know, as trainers, and me as a doc on my side, is that sometimes people don't perceive how bad they are. And unfortunately for you guys, is that now you're going to be putting them through above and beyond demands called exercise, and that's when we start to see things pop up. That's when we start to see, you know, the unusual neck pain or unusual back pain sometimes. And I just want you guys better prepared on how to deal with that, because unfortunately, guys, our population is not getting healthier as time goes on. Since I started training 20 years ago, obesity's increased almost, you know, 17% or so just in our area. I mean, it's going up higher and higher. And I can tell you now from the clinical side, 10 years being a chiropractor, I can see a lot of the postural changes that we're seeing, especially in kids nowadays, coming up. So one of the first things first is that when we're all babies inside mom's womb, we're actually shaped like a C. So we're not shaped like an S. We're shaped like a big old C with the head down the bottom, hopefully. And when we come out, gravity starts to take effect on us. So when we trace it back to where human movement started from, it actually starts when we're on our bellies. And that's one of the important concepts right now we're dealing with in pediatrics, and as developmental childhood development goes, we're looking for a lot of belly time. And the reason being is because the first thing that we're trying to form is that curve, is that neck curve. So the neck curve kind of comes in here and it forms a nice arc right there. The second curve that we form as we develop out is through crawling. So there's a lot of phases you'll see when I work with my patients, and as you guys work with clients, putting someone into a quadruped position is very beneficial because it gets them back to the crawling phase, which is this little curve right here forms now. So that's your thoracic curve. And then finally, about 10 months to about, depends on the child. Sometimes they say the second, third, and fourth child actually walk faster. They'll start to develop out this next curve right here is that lumbar curve. So I told you my drawings are horrific, but you get the idea. So we have a neck curve, we have a mid-back curve, then we have a lumbar curve. And I'll tell you now, so my computer is a little bit glitchy, so that's one of the reasons that came out so bad. So we have those three curves developed out, and it really develops out strong between the ages of about 4 until about the age of 6. Now, there's a unique thing that every one of us that are on this phone call right now have gone through at the age of 6 years of age. And my daughter, who's 6 right now, is going through it. She's in her first grade right now, which means she's in school for 5 days a week, and she's sitting for about 6 to 7 hours a day. Now, they do have two recesses, which I was kind of happy about, but she still sits way too much. And now, again, I've been adjusting my daughter since she's been a day old. Matter of fact, I adjusted her on the day she was born. And so I know what her curve feels like. I know what it looks like. And I can tell you right now, guys, it's definitely started to diminish, even in the time span of just being in school only for about 4 months now. it's already starting to diminish a little bit. And it's a concerning part, and but again, that's why we try to work with some exercise portions. So what happens is as we start to sit, we start to develop out these patterns. And now attached to these bones right here are the muscles. So again, that's the big part for you guys is you have all these muscles that kind of attach into the extremities, out to the hands, out to the feet that start to create motion. While some of the common ones that we'll see that as we start to go through this life and we start to bring our knees up into this seated position, because this is what we're going to talk about today a little bit with this FMS, what we're looking for is this, a lot of sitting, is we start to lose these curves in here. We start to develop a lot of tightness out of the hip flexors is a real big one. The next big one too is the shoulders. So as the arms go forward now, the person's reaching out here and they're typing on a keyboard all day. I'll try and draw the best keyboard as I possibly can. So as that person's on that keyboard all day, they start to develop out these over-taut muscles. And I'll jump to my PowerPoint here in a second, but 70% of the population now does have some sort of job that requires them to sit for anywhere between 6 to 10 hours a day. Now what happens is there's an important component that you guys may or may not know, but most of your posture is actually found up here inside the cerebellum. It's a part of the brain. It's underneath the actual big brain up here. So this guy's got a huge brain. So the brain up here is divided into two big parts, the frontal lobe and the posterior lobe. The frontal lobe is primarily responsible for the interpretation and the application of movement. The cerebellum is there when the posture is in static motion. So when your client's just standing there, their body goes to a default. It's kind of like when you boot up a computer and your computer loads programs. Well, it puts strain on the computer that way. Well, our bodies do that too. When we wake up and we've sat for 8 hours a day for the past 10 years, our body defaults. And we start to see a lot of tight hips. We start to see a lot of rounded shoulders. Now, the problem with that is we start to lose our posture. We'll start to see things shift. We'll see a lot of forward head carriage, so that the head will start to travel in front of the body. And the problem with that is now we start to see degeneration because of physics. Now, physics says that when something is held close to the body, and everybody's done this test before, I'm sure, is that if you're ever squatting with a person, you have them holding a dumbbell close to their chest, such as in a goblet squat, the weight can stay pretty much light. So let's say it's a 10-pound weight. Well, if they move that weight away from their body by extending their arms out, well, that weight gets that much heavier, making that exercise that much harder. Well, the thing is, you didn't give them an extra heavy kettlebell or a dumbbell. It's just because they're moving it away from their center of gravity, it's putting a lot of stress and strain back onto the structures. And that's what we'll start to see with our clients is we'll start to see the stress and strain, especially in the neck and the low back area. And a lot of it's due now because these muscles are so over-taut because they're always in that seated posture. They come into you guys right away, and they're already in a really bad default position, which if you do start to load that person, they have a much higher chance of becoming injured and hurt. So keep the cerebellum in mind. So the cerebellum, basically, this part of the brain right here, it picks up messages back from all the proprioceptors, like in our joints, inside of our muscle spindles, inside of our GTO. So these muscles and your joints all have these mechanisms to tell the body where it's at in space. So if everybody out there right now closed your eyes and put your hand in the air and just held your thumb up, you could keep your eyes closed and you'll realize your thumb's in the air because your body's telling you. You don't have to see it. So you have all that proprioception there, and it tells you a lot. Well, that same proprioception also, again, finds itself into a default. So as you start to educate this part of the brain here, you start to see these postures start to shift. So one of our goals today is we're going to address a lot of these different components. We're going to address today the stabilizer muscles. The muscles are going to stabilize the posture because right now they're not doing their job. We're going to talk about the facilitated muscles or the tight muscles because the muscles are so used to being short, they start to develop out trigger points. And then ultimately we're going to look at this guy up here, this cerebellum. How can you help your client retrain this part of their brain so they don't have to keep stretching? So I can tell you right now that guys, stretching alone does not work. It's short-lived, even PNF, even long, 60, 90-second holds. That simply alone won't do it because the cerebellum will default you back to your original position. So if you take a person and you're like stretching their hamstrings for 4 or 5 months, well, if they keep going back to their normal part and you don't reinforce that movement, so they stretch their hamstrings, let's say they stretch their hamstrings every morning because you told them for 10 minutes at 6 a.m. in the morning. They get up earlier and they start stretching those hamstrings. Well, by the time they sit in their car and drive down to Philly for their job, do you think their hamstrings are staying flexible? Well, the answer is no, because, again, when the person in a seated position, the hamstrings are down here, they're now shortened again. So, and unfortunately, guys, the 10 minutes of stretching is short-lived by the 60-minute car drive down to Philly. So the brain up here says, all right, well, it was long for about 10 minutes, but now it's short for 60, so I'm going to go back to being tight. So that's where we're going to have to start, again, understanding that component and how we start to work through that. And again, that's what we're going to work on building that part today. So again, thank you very much. I'm not a Rembrandt or any famous artist out there, so I appreciate that. And if you joined us late, that's my drawing of a human a human spine, which is scary. So I'll stay to chiropractic and working instead of artistry. All right, so let's go to some slideshows here. Okay, so the functional trainer, module 2. So what happens is in the human body is we start to develop out these things called cross syndromes, which is where we're getting a lot of the information for the FMS. Thanks, Bryce. It looks sweet. So for the FMS, and really what it comes down to is 80% of your clients will fail some portion of the FMS. So out of those 8 movements, an average person, 80% of the people coming through FMS will fail some component, whether they're upper cross dominant, lower cross dominant, or they have trouble midline stabilizing. They will fail either through range of motion inadequacies, they can't get the range of motion down, or very typically through pain. One of the reasons is because 80% of your clients sits for a living, or they just sit way too much in that living, causing them to have those syndromes. Again, that's what we're going to kind of relate back to a lot today. Almost 100% have some sort of ache or pain. This is something I developed about 8 years ago when I started doing my lectures. I started to, ask the audience, go ahead and raise your hand if you have shoulder pain. And the person, five people raise their hand. I'd say, okay, keep your hands up. Raise your hand if you have low back pain. Raise your hand up. 2 or 3 people would do it. Inevitably, it was almost amazing, but almost 100% of the people had some sort of ache and pain that was currently going through their body while I was doing my talk. Now, they weren't exercising. They were just sitting there, and they had some sort of ache or pain that wasn't being managed or taken care of. And it's amazing because, believe it or not, guys, pain's not a normal signal in the body. Pain's kind of that early warning mechanism that there's some catastrophe. Now, when you have complete numbness, or you have tingling, or you have radiating pain, that's higher level pain. That's when your body's now saying, listen, dumbass, you really have a problem. And that's when all of us go to if it's a tooth, that's when we go to the dentists. I'm sure there's many people sitting out there sometimes had a tooth pain, it goes away, okay, no big deal. But as soon as that thing starts throbbing, you're there. You're trying to get that thing taken care of. Now, the majority of your clients coming through is they have those early warning signs, whether it's a lack of range of motion or it's that coming and going pain, the pain that comes only after, prolonged sitting, or after, even when they sleep, and they close their eyes and lay down, their shoulder starts throbbing them. They're all pains that aren't supposed to be there in that body. And again, that's something that as we start to work more with our clients, I want everybody aware of on how we're going to start to manage those. And the number one reason people stop working out, is because of injury. That's the number one reason people get hurt. When you create pain in a person's body, they don't tie a good feeling onto exercise, and unfortunately, sometimes it's onto you. One of the stories I shared, I just got back into training with my wife, which I took some time away from doing that for obvious reasons. It's hard to train significant others, but she went out to one of the very highly respected gyms in the area. Again, we're up in Souderton, so it's a little bit far for us to get down to Warrington, Doylestown, or New Hope. But we went to a gym locally, and it was a very highly regarded strength conditioning specialist out of Princeton who's opened up a facility up here. And she proceeded to put my wife and her girlfriend through a workout. And my wife couldn't walk for about 2 weeks. And, and she's pretty fit. She's an active runner. She does mostly the mud runs. But it was interesting to me, and I asked her, I wanted her to go back because I thought, again, I know the person's background, and I thought to myself, man, I want her doing this because, one, her friend's there, and if her friend's there and she makes a commitment and Kim makes a commitment, she's going to go more often, and her friend's pretty committed to this. And it couldn't happen because she was so hurt, her legs bothered her so bad, and she wouldn't go back. So it was cool today. So we got up early this morning, got the kids off to school, and then ran over there real quick. And I just wanted to make sure she starts to get them moving. So we jumped out to the Y locally for us. Like I said, it's hard to get down to our gyms. And I put her through, just one of our workouts. And again, now the goal is to kind of get her going through. But, the reason why she stopped working out was because she pretty much got injured, even though it wasn't a long-term part. But, I mean, she was demolished from that workout. And, again, it just left a bad taste in her mouth, and she's not going to be going there. So, like I said, I wanted her to, though. All right, so here's the cause. So one of the reasons why we have so many cross syndromes in our body, and why 80% of the clients are going to fail at some portion, is because we sit way too much. Whether it's, this guy watching the football game on Sunday, or this guy at his work trying to do his work at Starbucks, or this guy at his job, we just come down to is just really recruit way too much muscle. As you can see almost in all these. As a matter of fact, from a chiropractic standpoint, This guy actually has the best posture when it comes to loads on his body because he's pretty much reclined laying position. He's not loading up those discs to where these guys leaning forward are really compressing out those discs. Not only that, but if you see the angle of the hip, this is very short. He's pretty open right here. So, it doesn't look pretty. It's actually not the worst way to sit, except for maybe that neck. But yeah, so this is kind of a very typical part we're going to see when we're dealing with our clients. Any number of your clients are going to come through, and you're going to see that ear way out in front of that shoulder, where I refer to them as the DBs, the DB shoulders. I won't say the word on air, but the DB shoulders where they round forward. We'll see those quite a bit too. And again, that's all part of this right here, which is called your upper and lower cross syndromes. This is great. You can Google. This is from Yanda's work. Yanda was a physiotherapist out of the Czech Republic, if I'm not mistaken. And his work really didn't get a lot of attention until after he passed away, unfortunately. But a lot of these things really are coming true now when I look at my patient base and I look at your client base, and especially when we scan them with the FMS, we're going to start seeing a lot of these things start to kind of pop up. We're going to see these inhibited abdominal muscles, but fired by an inhibited glute med. When you're looking at these syndromes, I look pretty much straight across. You'll see a person that will have a tight rectus femoris, so it'll be a tight part of that quadricep, and then a tight iliopsoas going up in that lumbar spine. When these are over tight, they inhibit these muscles from working. So I think you guys, I might have mentioned it in my first video. We talked about the no acetol syndrome. Well, the reason why we get no acetol is one is because we sit on it all day, and the other one is because when we drive this knee up in a seated position, it contracts this muscle, causing this muscle not to fire anymore. So we start to get less and less stress or stimulus on that glute, and then we stop firing it. Well, the problem with that, everybody on here should know, is that 90% of your exercise, maybe 80%, but 80-90% should be done in an extended posture or standing posture. I'm not a real big seated exercise kind of guy. I'm not real big on equipment that forces your clients to sit into a position and put load because they do it already too much. So you can do anything seated. You can do standing. So I would definitely highly recommend that we start looking, you guys start looking at your exercise from a standing position to start to help recruit some of those muscles. What we're going to see typically is this. We're going to see an over-facilitated or very tight, possibly trigger-pointed, where the myofascial release is going to come in, rectus femoris and iliopsoas. The tighter contracted muscle causes it to be over-tensioned. It will then sometimes even cause spinal distortion, which we'll see a lot with low back pain. Typically, psoas is the main culprit with low back pain. That's why some trainers, and I love working with my trainers that are very good with psoas, whether it's stripping or stretching it, it really helps the patient, for me, to really start to get that curve back in. Firing off or exercising the right muscle. Firing off that glute, med, min, and max to start to create some energy. And guys, and again, this is the most powerful muscle in the human body from a load stance. We want to make sure we're firing that off. That's a typical one you'll see there. The other one we'll see very commonly is this over-tight pec and SCM. That's a very tight one too. Again, those arms are out in front. The person's at a computer all day. Any one of you right now, if you just go ahead and reach up into your pec major, pec minor area and even work through it a little bit, it's not real hard to find one or two major spots in there that are tight on you. And again, we're sometimes faulted with this, and again, it's always gets me a kick out of when I talk to trainers. We fall apart just as quick as our clients do sometimes because we find ourselves not taking care of ourselves. And this is one of the answers for me that helped me kind of solve some of these riddle of us of why we do this to ourselves. But the pec major, pec minor are big areas, and usually we see them as an inhibited lower trapez serratus. And again, that's where that DB shoulder, that shoulder rolls forward, so they have that rolled in look to them. And not uncommon, we'll see it especially in our gyms. We'll see the guys that want to do chest and tris all day, and they'll get those big over facilitated pec muscles because what's in front of this guy is the mirror. Probably the scourge for me when I walk through the gym, I see those mirrors, I'm like, oh, they're one of the worst piece of equipment in the gym, but that and a scale. And when that person's looking at those muscles, they forget all about these posterior muscles back here. And next thing you know, we get a real dominant frontal, big, not even legs anymore, but big chests and big arms and nothing in the backside. So really neat thing to look at. I like just referencing this back all the time because it kind of opens up some of the, knowledge bombs when I'm working with clients. I'm like, oh, that's why that works. And here's some trippy stuff too. And if you want to go a little bit deeper, Myers, I think it's I can't remember his first name, but he wrote the Muscle Trains. Great book because he kind of builds off a lot of these simplified. It's a simplified sling theory where he's got more of the complex slings, And I've seen in practice where one time I was working with a person with TMJ. I'm not sure if anybody ever heard of TMJ, but it's a really crappy, every time you chew, you get a crack or a pain. So imagine every time you bite into food, you get pain. It's a really cruddy condition and very hard to treat clinically. And one time I was working with a woman where I was working a lot with her jaw and her neck to resolve it, and it works about 90% of the time. But it wasn't working for this young woman, and I said, all right, well, let's reevaluate here real quick. And what kept coming up was this psoas down here was always tight, so she failed the prone hip extension exercise every single time. So I knew she had a tight hip. Well, I said to her, I said, listen, I'm only going to start to work on your hips and not going to touch your jaw for any length of time. And we did about 6 visits where she came in and just got this hip and low back and our psoas worked on, and sure as heck, the TMJ went away. So I didn't touch this, but I touched this, and that went away. And the reason being is because all these slings are tied together. We're like a real big lattice work. So as her hips were tight, it was causing her neck to go in front of her body. So she couldn't get her neck back into position because her tight hips were pushing her head forward. So as soon as I got her hip stretched and her hip moving, her neck naturally just went back into a better posture, lessening off the load of the muscles up here. And she's like, oh my God, I can't believe I don't have TMJ anymore. She was actually waiting to get dentist work because she had dental pain. She couldn't open her mouth wide enough. And we got her up to the dentist, and she was very, very grateful. And now what she does is she therapizes her own hip using the algorithm I'm going to talk about here in a second. And then she also works on her neck posture, and she gets adjusted quite a bit in her neck still because it was a bad area. And it might be Tom Myers. I'm not sure if anybody's got a Google out there, because I know Brian, I think, mentioned Tom Myers. I'm not sure. All righty, so that's the syndromes. All right, so what I emailed you guys out and started to email off with last time was just this little bit of a diagram. It actually doesn't look too bad, and it's a blown up view. This is what I put together for myself back when I really started working with the functional model of training and looking at the body a little bit differently than just looking at chest, tries, back, bis, and trying to work on people's weak links and muscles and dominance. And I kind of broke it down into, okay, what are some of the major attributes out there that I want to make effect on? Now, being a CrossFit guy, understanding that there's really 10 general physical components that we work with to make change. And that would be something like, flexibility, we can change. It's organic too. If you start working with flexibility and a person keeps doing flexibility and they start to move through what we're going to talk about here in a second, I didn't say stretch. I said working on their flexibility, which is a few more parts into stretching. They will start to increase their stretch. If you start strength training with an athlete and you slowly, progressively load the weight on the bar or dumbbell or kettlebell, they will get stronger. If you make that client run a little bit further each time they run, they will get better endurance. Same for stamina, same for speed, same for power, same for endurance, same for agility, same for a ton of them. So if you start to practice those, you'll start to get there. So what I did was looking at it, I said, all right, really, what are the 3 things that we want to mostly make effect on, or I want to make effect on to create change? Now, keep in mind, this template here is designed out for the average individual coming through. It should be about 80% of the clients that come through at Cornerstone will really benefit from finding this. Now, there's some clients out there that might have specificity, whether it's working back there at MVP or it's working in, with an athlete on your floor that you're trying to create this change, whether it's a bodybuilder. This necessarily won't benefit. It could help them, but it may not work benefiting. But for me, the average person really benefited from really trying to train these 3 things during their time with me. Number 1 was energy systems. So number 1 was starting out with some sort of interval-based HIIT, high-intensity interval training, that got their heart pumping, got their tissues plastic. Guys, remember, there is a plasticity to our tissues. When we sit down all day long and we're tight, the tissue does have a quality of flexibility, but also there is a tissue quality component. So this is where I get the body warmed up. So I get the 98.6 degrees up to, 100 and some degrees by getting them to want to sweat and try to burn off some of those calories. I do this for about 15 to 20 minutes. The 2 types that I talked about earlier was skill set and non-skilled. So non-skilled is sticking them on one of these guys here. So sticking on a treadmill for 15 to 20. And remember, applying the HIIT principle. So undulating the intensities up to 75%, back down, and working your way up so you're increasing loads. I like to call this sweaty cardio. I try to make sure I'm getting them into some sort of sweaty cardio. You can absolutely design out from a skill set some sort of movement, dynamic movement warm-up, or maybe a mini WOD, a mini workout, whatever you want to do at that time, just kind of get body weight with some activities. And so that's where my energy systems comes in. And again, the reason I do that is the sweat mechanism, by the way, is in my regards the second healthiest mechanism in the body. The first healthiest mechanism is fever. Because if your body can't get a fever, it can't burn off that bacteria or virus, and you're not going to be around long. So I think fever is one of the best mechanisms we have. The second one is sweat, and sweat also deals with heat. So when your body's sweating, it's trying to push the heat out of the tissues, because every time you create motion, every motion creates heat. So we're efficient. Most of us are efficient at getting rid of that heat, typically through that sweating mechanism, through the rising of the heat, pushing out into the environment. Your deconditioned athletes, if you notice, guys, they pant almost like a dog. So they're trying to get energy or heat out of their mouth. So they're actually panting. You'll see that too. That's why sweating is a very good sign as a person sweats. And even if you're embarrassed by it, you shouldn't be, because it means you have a healthy mechanism there. Not only that, but when the sweat mechanism kicks in is also the time that we start to see, again, that plasticity starts to become more mendable. If you've ever had with children sometimes with heating plastic for doing the shrinkable pieces, well, when you're drawing out the shrinkadinks, they're pretty solid, and as soon as you stick them into that heat, they become very malleable. They get very bendable, and so that's going to be a component too we'll talk about, is why you want to get that energy system warmed up. And then we go into mobility. Now, mobility is done either through your wellness coach will guide you there. So your wellness coach may come up to you and say, hey, Mary failed her ASLR and her shoulder pass-through. You'll have two corrective complexes to reach from and say, okay, well, this one's going to be ASLR, and this one's going to be shoulder pass-through, and then the exercise you might have done. So, and again, the rep schemes and all that fun stuff. So that's all in there. Again, I use this in the beginning when I first started doing it, just to start to, how I visioned it was that I'm filling these boxes in. So I'm doing some energy system training, some mobility pieces, and some strength. So the other part of the mobility training would be the person that comes through and they haven't filled FMS, or maybe haven't done FMS, but the strength part's going to be very dominant, maybe in the hip hinge area. So maybe it's a deadlift, or maybe it's a lot of kettlebell swings coming up. So what I would do is I screen them first. I screen them with PVC or through motion and see if there's any kinetic chain hiccups, and then I'll actually usually design out some sort of mobility piece based on that. I typically know after about 2 or 3 sessions with a client where they're at when it comes to their FMS and where it comes to their weak links, and I'll work that. It might even be just a simple question in the beginning of, have you ever had low back pain? Well, most low back pain is going to be attributed to some sort of tight hip flexor or an ASLR, so a tight hamstring. So I always go after those two because, again, that's the beneficial part. So this up here in theory would be about 15 to 20 minutes. This is about 15 to 20, and then this would be about 15 to 20 also. And again, they're just the basic boxes. Again, if your client's very deconditioned, you may find your time here at 50 minutes and not be able to get to here, especially for your day 1, day 2s where the person's just coming through. It might be very short-lived 10-minute strength day, but it might be a lot of mobility. Again, remember, mobility, when you're dealing with a person in quadruped or dealing with a person doing some yoga, this might be just enough of a workout for them, but ideally you start to work it up. Now, you may have clients that are working you for a while, and they're not going to eat this up for anything. So you got to figure out a way to fit some of these pieces in there. And what I recommend on that is maybe taking one complex and just kind of work it through in a fast cycle. And again, I'll show you that in a second with some of the foam rollers and the lacrosse ball pieces. And you want to maybe just do about at least 6 or 7 minutes here, just enough to say, hey, listen, let's get the brake off. I go back to my Ferrari analogy. Again, I love the brand Ferrari. But if you gave me a Ferrari with emergency brake on, it wouldn't be a fun car to drive. If you took the emergency brake off, I'd have no problem wanting to race around and drive it. So I know for a fact that I don't want to pay repair charges for a broken down Ferrari. So I recommend for your clients who have, they want to get pushed hard, is realizing that when you get that e-brake off, the emergency brake off, it's going to allow them to have that much of a better exercise too. And it's a really good feeling, guys, I'll be honest with you too, is when that person comes back through and they're conscious of their low back, and they're like, man, ever since I started doing some of this stuff, that low back doesn't ever peak up on me, which is great. Also, by the way, this is the one part of the exercising area where I do advise them to take this home, take that home with them, and start to work on their own. Because remember, I told you, they just go back and sit and don't do anything. But I found this works out really well for about 5 minutes. And I usually tell people to do it between commercials. I usually tell them if they're watching TV at night, grab their foam roller and hit the foam roller for 90 seconds, and we'll work through that 90 seconds, 90-second stretching, do some bridging, and then patterning work. And about 5 minutes later, the TV show's back on, and you got some mobility out of the way. So that's a really good time to get that done. And then strength, we're going to build on that, guys. Again, this isn't going to be for today's talks. But I always do it from movement, not from muscles. So when I break up the human body and look at it, look from a hip dominant, there's a knee dominant too somewhere, there's knee dominant. And I look at it from a push-pull cycling of pushing down, and then pushing up and pushing out. So, again, we'll go through that on the later parts. And then obviously factor in some sort of mobility. I like going back to yoga at the end of my workout, just something personal preference for me. Or my best that I swim with yoga, because if Bob was on here and Bob saw me do yoga, he'd probably vomit in his mouth because it's not a pretty sight. But I try to do it, which is good. And hopefully I learn more with him as I work up in New Hope more. All right, so mobility and stability. So really what's coming out to is the FMS screen is designed to give you a strategy to start to address your functional deficits of your clients. And again, 80% of the clients will fail some part of that FMS. So of the 8, they'll have at least one that they fail. From that fail, you're then going to want to pick and choose a mobility management system for them. So what I put together when I saw work best for me was these 4 things. And the 4 things was myofascial releasing, using a foam roller, lacrosse balls, or peanuts. There they are. I'll go there in a second. PNF stretching, or contract release, or some form of stretching. Stabilizing, typically the pelvis or the shoulder girdle. And then mobilizing at the point of the restriction, or called greasing the groove. So mobilizing would be that key component. This is that patterning. This is what the person needs to understand, that when they're at work, they got to find a way to get out of that pattern. So this is one of the things I really emphasize a lot on here for the client to really start to work on and to reinforce that movement. So we're going to work through each one of these 4 points here, and I'll bring up the actual sheets here in a second. And you all should have the download. It's in your email. So you would be able to download that piece and have all, I think I put 10 in there, because there are some different ways to do some of these on some of the fails. So the myofascial releases have all these. Now, some of you guys have a lot of these. Some of you guys don't. I know, this is in Doylestown. I know that. I've seen a rumble stick around places. This piece too. There's all ways to do it, guys. I love low tech, so I love taping 2 lacrosse balls together, or 1 lacrosse ball together, or a big old softball. You can get at tissue in any way. It's just a matter of getting that pressure on that tissue. So I do have a background in active release technique, or ART. I was educated through the actual creator of ART back about in 2004 when I graduated from chiropractic college. And it was one of the more miraculous pieces that I saw as you start to create tissue quality change. Now, I am not going to go back to my drawing tablet, but yes, I will. Hang on a second. Let me draw this out for you. Bear with me here on the drawing again. All right, we got a little bit of time. All right, let me get a new one here. File, open. Oops. All right, let me get my pen over here. Good. All right, so just so you have an idea, normal natural tissue looks something like this. The normal tissue is usually in this basket woven presentation. And bear with me because I'm using a mouse. There we go. It's usually in this basket woven presentation. Very healthy tissue. So like right now, if you pushed on your typically basket woven tissue that's not all grundly and grody, can typically be found in the shoulder area. So if you pushed up on your deltoid a little bit, you feel how pliable it is. There's got a lot of give to that tissue to kind of go through. It's not too bad. And some people, sometimes the biceps too are pretty pliable. If you feel on the biceps, it's got a real nice kind of texture to it. When you push on it, it's kind of soft and mobile, which is cool. And then what you'll see, though, as time goes on, is as that person gets injured, or as they're sitting at their desks for a whole lot of time, you'll start to see this start to happen. This meld and mend and blend of this, it's almost like a laminate. Have you guys ever seen like laminate? Have you ever seen a laminate at your in your kitchen or in your bathroom? Laminate is when 2 pieces of particle with glue in between is melted, is heated, and it starts to stick together. And what happens is with time is this beautiful basket woven arrangement starts to become all sorts of messed up. So what I'll typically see for most people is that not only will it be messed up, but you also see these really tight, tender areas. And these are the areas where you want to kind of get on when it comes down to your foam rolling. So the muscle itself might be pretty ropey, or you might have it to where it's like this, and you might have just one area where there's been an infarct. Now remember, the reason why this is red like that is because there was damage to that tissue. There was some sort of stress or strain, and it wasn't able to get out of the body. And so, and I know everyone out there, has, skinned their knee up, or some of you guys box jumping relatively lately have a scab on their shin right now, and the scab on the outside starts to get real hard and crusty, and eventually it starts to flick away or pop off, and you just have this like white tissue there now. Well, the problem is inside of muscle, it doesn't have the ability to get out of there like that. So what happens is it starts to build up, especially because the average person doesn't know anything about active recovery or how to treat their tissues. Because most people never, if you get injured, guys, it's rest, ice, compress, and elevate, and you want to make sure you're starting to get that tissue addressed right away. But you'll see, like, a lot of your clients come through and they'll have like a strain or a pain pattern that always manifests about 4 or 5 weeks in, and it's probably because one, their muscle looks like this, and this thing finally just starts to act up again. And what happens then is that then we go back to that pain cycle. Well, by the way, guys, this muscle here, because of this trigger point, now has less elasticity, so the flexibility is now going away. Over time, the muscle gets even worse. This is a very over-tension muscle because now the body's got to respond to that trigger point in there. So this is kind of the tissue. Now, believe it or not, tissue qualities can increase, so we can actually start to create change. A really brutal reality, though, this is according to Glayton's physiology, it's about 1 to 1.5 years to get the tissue to get somewhat back to this area right here. Because it takes that much time to really start to create tissue change in that area. So understanding that anybody that's in there foam rolling just for a couple of days, it's not going to do its job. It's not going to create the muscle change. Remember, you're trying to change physiology, and just like if you gave your client 100 sit-ups, they'd go home sore that day from 100 sit-ups, but they won't have a six-pack, and they won't necessarily create more muscle underneath that belly. But same thing works with tissue and healing, is that as you start to roll in that, this tissue in here is addressed. So as you start to foam roll and you start to find these worse spots, this tissue now becomes re-injured, and that's advisable to get that person to want to start moving. And that's where the stability and the patterning work come in, almost from a lymphatic draining stance. You'll also see this treated with ice sometimes. So if you have a person that's very tender, I'll have them ice this area when they're done. Or in some cases with like my office, we have laser therapy, and laser therapy is really good for that getting healed up too. So there are ways to increase that ability to get the tissue back to here. But it takes some time, and again, it's something we don't work with. You got to make sure you're setting those expectations that foam rolling for one time is not going to do the job. It's got to be repeated at a minimum 90 days on that tissue, and at a max, you want to keep working it because typically they'll keep kind of re-aggravating. So let's go back to the current slide. All right, so there they are. So change your goal with all these torture devices over here is to change the tissue quality. So what I recommend for everybody is that when you're working with a muscle group, you're going to roll the entire muscle. And you want to basically come out to where the state, then you want to make them find the most painful point. So the most painful point was that red area in that really messed up muscle. Now they may have like a 2 out of 10 low. They may have a 5 out of 10 in the middle of their quad. Well, I'm going to have them hang out on their middle of their quad for about 60 seconds. When I'm on that middle, I keep them there. I don't move them off that. They're literally going to lay on that point, roll back and forth, like matting it down. So if you put your fist into your hand and just rock your hand back and forth inside your hand, that's the motion you want on the most painful spot for them. So you want them to be able to push that through. And what that's going to do is start to almost like pick at that scab a little bit. You're trying to break up that adhesion. 60 to 90 seconds is advised. I usually roll for 30, and then 60 seconds I'll stay on that tissue, and I'll go back and forth on it. Again, what you're trying to do is you're trying to pick that scab away. So now when you pick the scab away, the muscle now has more extensibility, because remember, when you're rolling on it and you're pushing on it, you're drawing blood and heat to the area. And if you reheat a piece of laminate, like I'm tapping on my desk in front of me, if I reheated this laminate, I could start to peel it back because the glue becomes less sticky. And that's what I want you to get to. You got to get that glue less sticky. So the second thing you're going to do is stretch. So after your myofascial release is done, you're going to stretch the involved muscle. So if it's let's say it's my quad, my rectus femoris up high in my hip area, I'll roll typically with a lacrosse ball or a piece of foam roller up on my hip for 90 seconds. And then I'll come off of it and I'll go up into what we call a couch stretch. So I'll put my foot up onto a couch and I'll drop my knee down, stretching out my quad. Now what I do is it's a 15 seconds of a stretch, so you're feeling that stretch come through. You're then going to contract the opposite muscle. You're going to contract that glute in the back for the hip, and it's going to squeeze for 5, relax it, and stretch for 15 seconds. Squeeze for 5, and you're going to feel that open up, and then you're going to do it for 6 to 9 cycles. 6 to 9 cycles should run you about 90 seconds. You guys can see a theme here. I'm going to do 90 seconds, and then you stretch that hip, and then you're going to go to stabilizing it. Now you're going to go to the joint above or below. Typically it would be your pelvis or your shoulder girdle. So what I do is I typically look at the hips, I look at the shoulders as two of the main engines. Majority of your exercises will be, energy-wise, will be generated out of their pelvis and out of their shoulder girdle. So I go back to upper body, I usually plank, and usually lower body usually stabilize using the pelvis. So with the bridging, you do the bridge with induction if you want, or abduction if you want to, but I typically want to hold that for 90 seconds or work up to 90 seconds. So your average client might be able to do it for 30. Your goal is to get them up to, 3 sets of 30 until they get to 90 seconds total, will be to stabilize that joint above. And what you wind up doing in this case, guys, you start to create this stability now that allows the muscles above and below that to start to work from a mobility standpoint. So you're literally telling your body, hey, this is now stable. Now I can do above and below. And again, that's all Mike Boyle's. You guys get a chance to go over to Mike Boyle's website. His joint-by-joint approach is a fantastic resource that I've used, and that's going to stabilizing out that pelvis and getting into that low back. And then your pattern. So again, going back to that drawing, is that your cerebellum, which sits up inside that brain, it's the most important component when it comes down to controlling and coordinating all the beautiful receptors that we have sitting outside of our body. So as these mechanoreceptors, like in his knee, in his tissue, his muscle spindles, his GTO, so all this anatomy and physiology pieces are telling the body that this is normal for him now. So his brain up here says, this is normal, this is less energy, this is where I need to be at all times. So when he goes ahead and stands up now, he'll start having a head out in front of his body. He'll get up like he's an 80-year-old man because now he's using muscles and he's tearing himself apart. So this is a really important part, guys. The pattern is going to be a big one. So again, 80% of your clients are in this position. Their cerebellum is now rewired up here to tell them, hey, this is your normal. And then, again, that's when we start seeing neck pain, back pain, shoulder pains, or just overall muscle that don't get the same workout. So by now the fourth goal of our whole workout is to use the joint now. So use the joint and muscles in a functional range that reminds and re-educates the cerebellum that we should have full active range of motion. Majority of people, for instance, in their arm area, majority of people don't go outside of this box right here. So this box I'm drawing with my marker, they don't get out of there. They sit there all day. They eat from there. They drive from there. They watch TV from there. So when you expect them to go up overhead, so outside the box, so they're up in this area, you're at a very, that's their normal active range of motion, but they're at a very precarious position to start to get hurt. As a matter of fact, one of the first limits you'll see in a client typically is they can't go overhead. Or they say, my doctor says I can't go overhead. Well, good luck if you're going to go on an airplane ride with your family down to Disney and you got to put something in the overhead compartment. It's going to be part of their everyday life. Or I love it when the doctor says you can't squat anymore. Well, give me a break. If you can't squat, you can't sit in a toilet. You can't do a ton of the natural human movements. So that's one of the reasons why deep overhead squat and the shoulder pass-through are part of the screens, because they'll tell us ahead of time if they can't do that. So when we relay to you as a wellness coach that the person failed their shoulder pass-through, it's telling you that they may have potential of going overhead and getting hurt. So you want to make sure that you're addressing some of this tissue down here to kind of activate and start to work at that. So that's actually going to lead me into this part here. So I'm going to work through a little bit. Since we have about 10 minutes, I'm going to try to work through some of these. So here is shoulder mobility. So when that person fails the shoulder pass-through, there's really two muscles that I want to work with. I want to work with, from a tissue quality, the lat, believe it or not, which are extremely tight typically on most people, or mostly the pec major, pec minor. Now I picked the lat today because I don't like using the foam roll on a person's chest. I do like using the lacrosse ball and a wall, so I have them stand at the wall, say in a door frame, and put their pec against the lacrosse ball and then work it through range of motion. That starts to break that up. So this person's going to do this for 90 seconds. He's then going to do contract relax using his lats for 90 seconds. And then he's going to move on to stabilizing, which is the plank for the upper body. So he's going to stabilize for 90 seconds. Even though it says 30, he's going to go for 90. And then he's going to do scapular wall rides. So this is one of the best patterning exercises that I teach all of my CFOs, CEOs, people that sit all day long. I make them do this 10 times a day. As a matter of fact, if you got any of your big, beefy muscle head guys that come through and, they want a shoulder workout, just stick them against the wall and have them do this for about 90 seconds and see how much they start to sweat. And remind them, hey, you're not even moving any weight right now. You have nothing in your hands. Or most guys can't even do this, especially with how much range of motion she has. I call that the human Bowflex. Sometimes we're so tight, we don't even need weights to kind of exercise anymore. Just use our body weight. So this person's going to slide her hands up and down, again, 90 seconds. So you're getting the idea here. So 90 seconds self-myofascial, 90 seconds of stretching, 90 seconds of stabilizing, 90 seconds of range of motion or pattern work. ASLR, the next top failed one. So active leg raiser. Typically, we're going to see in this one is going to be a tight hamstring. So the person that sits all day long, this tissue in here where they're sitting, remember, they're laminating that tissue. They're sitting for 6-7 hours a day sometimes. They're 98.5-pound bodies. As a matter of fact, everybody put your hand underneath your leg right now it's about 100 degrees down there. It's not 98.6. It's actually hotter than your body because the energy that you're generating through the seats, retaining that heat, it's about 100 degrees, and it's in a shortened pattern, and there's pressure. So the three things that we need to have laminate happen, again, think of a grilled cheese. You know, if you ever made a grilled cheese, you have bread, cheese, and bread, put an iron on top or heat on top, it melts that cheese. Well, this is what the foam rolling is doing. So 90 seconds of foam rolling, 90 seconds of hamstring stretching. So you're going to 90 seconds of P&F. So right now what she's going to do is push either up with her foot or down with her leg for 5 seconds and then pull that back into a 15-second stretch. She's then going to push against it for 5 seconds and then pull. And yes, by the way, guys, this is done by your client, not by you, okay? If you're going to do hands-on, we got to talk first. So if you want to do hands-on P&F contract release, come talk to me first because there's definitely some limits you want to work with. We're going to talk about this on the December 13th. We're going to break out and do some assisted P&F, but I recommend using the stretch straps that are available at all clubs, or even the stretch bands. So I do recommend P&F is done by the client, just instructing them to take the joint to an end range, push for 5 seconds, 15 seconds of relax. And again, the reason I do that is because, again, there's limitations there for what a trainer can do, especially when it comes to touching and all those fun things. So if you're doing P&F, just get with me ahead of time. So if I see it on the floor, and we'll talk about some of the pieces are there. If you're currently doing, like I said, just shoot me an email. Planking is easy enough, guys, 90 seconds. And then unilateral stiff-legged deadlift. Another exercise I have a lot of my clients and patients do. So I have them walk down the hallway and do a unilateral stiff-legged deadlift. Now, this will be non-weighted. So this image, unfortunately, I had to have a weight on there. But it will be unweighted, and they're just going to walk down the hallway and just touch back and forth or stand in place. But I like applying movement to it. Prone hip extension, I've seen this failed quite a bit. So again, this person rolling out the front of the hip, 90 seconds, stretching the hip. If you turn this picture sideways, you'll see the couch stretch there. It's just kind of a lunge. He's opening up this hip capsule, so he's going to stretch that for 90 seconds. Prone warrior, a warrior pose would be a good stretch for that too, for contract release for 15 seconds to stretch, 5 seconds contract. Then you're bridging. So your bridging is firing off those glutes, opening up the hips. So this is a perfect agonist-antagonist exercise. He's actively contracting his glutes, which is actively disengaging his psoas, so he's actively working that range of motion now. And then believe it or not, guys, a box step-up is a great exercise. So squeezing the glute at the very top so you can open up the hip capsule. That's a really good exercise too. So in your packet, everybody has these there that work through that process. It is not written in stone, guys. These are protocol-based. So if you want to do something else for this, you want to, again, it doesn't be foam roller. It could be a peanut. It could be the rumbler stick. It could be the tiger's tail. Whatever you want to do based on your client, then do. This is what I like to do. I like to do myofascial. I like to do P&F or contract release, client doing themselves, stability, and then right into this. Now, again, I know there's some NASM out there. There's a lot of good stuff. As long as you're plugging your pieces into the equation based off of what the findings were. So this person, again, they failed the ASLR. If you have some, knowledge above and beyond what I'm at right now, that's great. Apply it. And as long as you can start seeing reproducible results as time goes on, which I can do with this typically, go ahead for it, which would be good. So if anybody wants to kind of leave some questions, I got about 9 minutes left. If you want to post any questions or concerns, some issues, or if you're doing P&F right now and you want to say, well, why can't I do it or continue doing it, you can ask that question. We had a great turnout, so thanks everybody. There's 16 people of 26 that are available, so that was great. Any questions on there? Let me see if I got anything else for you guys. I can draw more if you guys want me to draw more. I can go back to this to the tissue quality. That's always a good one. I'm going to, again, follow up with everybody. What I'm going to do is this is currently being recorded, and what I'll do is it might take a little bit of time to render, but I will be able to package it up and re-email it out to you, every one of you, and you can go ahead and watch it over again if you have any questions. One of the goals for me over the next 2 weeks is getting out to each facility to kind of work with this. So the floor trainers that are out there, if you're on the floor and you have nobody and you're kind of walking the floor and I'm there, grab me up and just say, let's work through some of this stuff. And we'll just go through the 8 functional movements, and then we'll go through the breakouts based off what we see. And I have a lot of trainers coming up to me and asking me if they can be screened, and it's an absolute yes. I do want you to screen, and I want you to, when you get the wellness coach involved, and by the way, right now, Doylestown is the only one with Eric. Our fitness coordinator is also our wellness coach, but we are very close with Doylestown and Warrington with having a wellness coach come on board. But I'll let you know in Warrington and in New Hope and Doylestown too is that you will be required in a lot of cases to go ahead and do the FMS. So please watch the videos, watch that video again, watch the FMS. If you have questions on it, what a fail looks like, you know, is this a fail, is that a fail, grab me so we can know, because most cases the wellness coach is going to grab you up and say, hey, can you go ahead and work with, can you do the FMS for me on this part, because some of them aren't there. So I do have some great questions, but let me follow through here real quick. Alrighty. Excellent. So question was, what about if a person's excessively overweight? So yeah, so if you're dealing with somebody in a populace that just has a hard time getting down to the ground, you definitely, you know, again, you want to use your own kind of common sense with it for the most part, but realizing that mobility, you know, mobility is just as important to them. As a matter of fact, I typically, I'll be honest with you guys, I spend the first 2 weeks of most of my programming designing based on body weight alone. So, you know, your heavyweight person who has a hard time, I know some of the facilities do have it set up that you have a stretching table available so you can work on that a little bit. I have seen some of the trainers at the Doylestown location working with the tiger's tail for the ones that can't get onto the foam roller, so they'll have them sit on the edge of a table and then roll that hamstring out with the tiger's tail. Is not a bad idea. But again, for me, typically, if you go back to my, again, I think you might have missed the beginning part here, these 3 areas are based upon the person's level. So if they're at the level where they're obese and they're not doing much, I spend more time just getting them moving and sweating and then working on the mobility pieces, getting them up the ground, off the ground, working on body weight before I start to strengthen them. Again, strength to me, guys, is the movements that are addressed with load. So if you're pushing a dumbbell, a kettlebell, a barbell, a machine, anything that's over and above the body weight starts to form into some strength components. So again, this will be recorded too for you. All right, what are your thoughts on mobilizing the spine on heavy lifting days? You don't have the answer now. What are my thoughts on mobilizing the spine on heavy lifting days? Yes, your goal is to have the spine back into, did I erase my beautiful drawing? Let me see if I can. Yeah, I think I did. All right, yes, your goal right now for me is, I want to see is that your client gets back to having those good curves back in there. Now, maybe you draw that curve again, but your goal is to, yes, so you can absolutely mobilize the spine. You really want to watch for the movements and make sure they're grooved out. So if you're really working strength that day and you're working with the squat, I would scan the squat first with the body weight and a piece of PVC possibly, and see if you see any hiccups like the knees knocking in or the loss of the spine angle, and then work your mobility based on that. So again, so if it's like a knee knock and it can't be corrected, the person's knees are coming inwards, I may work the adductors over a little bit with the foam rolling the adductors, and then maybe doing some bridging with abduction, and then try to get them back into the body weight before I load them. So that would kind of be my thought process, to just get the movement pattern down first and then kind of work through. So yes, spine's okay. Yes, so T-spine's a big one, so great question, I think, is Brian. T-spine, most people have that real kyphotic, that bending forward in their middle back area. So yes, so I do recommend, I do it every day, as a matter of fact. I have a foam roller that I grab out when I get up in the morning, and I'll T-spine I'll roll my T-spine out pretty much every day, because again, I just sit too much with my new position with Cornerstone, and compared to my adjusting times. So I'm really finding myself more back into therapizing. So yes, the screen for the shoulder pastor is a great screen for shoulders. The other one too, which I think I demonstrated in the video, is where you have them stand about 4 inches from the wall, having their butt contacting the wall and their shoulders against the wall, and then have them actually raise their arms up above their head to try to touch their thumbs to the wall. That's a great shoulder screen too. Typically, if a person has a hard time doing that, it's because their thoracic spine is very locked up. And what you'll see is, as the hand goes up towards the wall, they'll start to go into extension, into an extended posture. So you definitely make sure that you're rolling out the middle back area. So let me just kind of wrap it up with just kind of going back into this guy right here. So again, so the 8 movements that are coming from the wellness coach, they may fail 1, 2, 3. I've had people fail all 8. And when it fails all 8 in your training manual, it tells you there's a hierarchy based upon the fails, that you want to make sure that you're addressing certain ones first. And typically they're going to be this one and this one are your 2 first. So your shoulder mobility and your active straight leg raiser are 2 of the main ones. But again, you guys know enough of this. As you work with it, you'll start to work through these. If you have nobody fail them all, like I was saying to Brian, I think, is that you want to make sure that whatever you're programming for, you're giving them the mobility pieces ahead of time. So again, if it's an overhead press, screen the overhead press. If it's a hip hinge, screen the overhead squat and screen out the prone hip extension. Or overhead, squat or lunge is a great screen, guys. I love the lunge for a screen. It's just a little bit complex sometimes. A lot of people fail it. So, but a lunge is a really good screen too for any kind of hip dysfunction. So we're right at the top of the hour. I kept it right to, I know you guys are busy people, so I appreciate all your time and energy. Look for Monday. You will receive my next email, which will be a video with a quiz. And again, I appreciate your patience with the quiz. It was my fault. I had you guys in a campaign, so I was emailing you out the quiz again. Some of you failed it. Most of you did really well. But yes, so thank you very much, and look out for that email. Thanks, guys.